What's up, hobby friends? My name is Casey and welcome to another miniature rescue. This week, I finally rescued models from my very first Warhammer army. Recently, I've been in the mood for something a little different. Now, I'm not sure that you can even call these models different just by looking at them, other than we know they need some serious work. But for me, these particular models represent a very long history that I've had with this game. These are Eldar Fire Dragons from around 2nd edition 40k and saw a ton of play in 3rd, and really ever since, because the Eldar faction is one of those that rarely ever see any kind of update, and even when they do, the excellent design aesthetic carries over very nicely into the newer models, making them not too dissimilar from older designs, just nicer materials to work with generally. In recent years, there have been quite a few major updates to the lineup, and I've been collecting newer models for this army, hoping to eventually get back to it and play a game with them. Something that I actually haven't done since maybe the early 2000s, give or take a couple years. The point is, it's been a very long time since I have done anything with them, and I'm feeling the itch to paint up some Craft World Eldar like the good old days. What's even better is that these fire dragons are actually the ones I got when I started playing Warhammer. These are my models that I painted when I started, and they look pretty bad, but that's okay. When I see these models, I'm reminded of the time spent building and painting, fresh into the hobby, and excited to just see models on the table. I love how models can do that, just transport us to a different time just by looking at them. I went with this interesting, we'll call it, silver, black, and gold theme, and I'm not quite sure why, although I do remember being pretty excited about picking up a few metallic paints around that time. Taking a look at my codex from back in the day, which was new when I got it, there are a few examples of painted fire dragons, none of which look like mine. Thinking back though, I want to say I was trying to get these ready for a weekend when my friend was coming over to play 40k, and I needed to get them ready quickly. So mostly silver, fill in a few details, and they're ready to go. Now I don't plan on saving all of these. I think it's important that a majority of my original models are left the way they are. It's a good reminder of how things started versus now, and seeing the models with the colors they have and condition reminds me of where I started. And it's a good thing to keep around. It continues to be a touch point for progress. The ones that need help are some of the ones that I got off of eBay that already had a little bit of paint on them, and some of the ones that were stuck in a plastic bag with a bottle of whatever green paint I had at the time that spilled out and covered a bunch of models. Even back then, I was trying to score the deals and rescue these guys. Kind of funny how things work out. This one got it the worst, and I'm hoping that the paint comes off pretty easily. We're about to find out. The paint and primer on all of these models are more than 20 years old at this point, and chewed up from being moved around a bunch of times, from house to house and drawer to drawer. Once again, I will be employing the jar of acetone and soaking them to remove all of the paint. For one reason or another, I've been kind of on a metal model kick lately, and this has been by far the quickest and easiest way to get paint off of these models. It's also quite satisfying to just see the paint fall right off. Now, I don't really know whether or not these models are any good anymore. I mean, on the table. And I mean in terms of gameplay. They will always be awesome as models, but I know that I need a few more and some of the X-Arch leader models to fill out at least 2 squads. The models I have, for whatever reason, are all pretty much the same pose. I did get them off of eBay, so I imagine they just came that way in the auction because the blisters came in with just a few poses anyways. But I am missing some of the other ones that were available. While those models sit in acetone for a minute, I'm gonna hop onto eBay and see if I can find the rest to fill them out. For the most part, these models are still pretty expensive. The Games Workshop site has them listed for $50 for a squad of 6 models. That means they're about $8.33 per model. It's not the worst price for a singular model these days, but still pretty high for models that haven't gotten an update in many, many years. So I'm gonna look for an auction that is hopefully a lower price than that per model. This one from Tista Minis, who I've bought from plenty of times before, come in at around $7.12 per model, and that includes 2 of the X Arch Minis that I need to make the squads complete. There are a few others that I came across that ended up being slightly more, around $7.40 per model, and the last one I found that caught my eye had 7 models, some of them slightly newer fine cast, but at least 1 model missing parts for $6.73 per mini, only 1 squad leader, and that happens to be the one missing parts, so it's kind of out. All the other auctions I found were nice and complete, but kind of around the MSRP, so no real reason to go for those unless I absolutely needed them for a game right now. So thanks again, Tista Minis, I bought them. And yeah, that's my mailing address on screen, but not my home address, so as much as I appreciate you writing that comment right now to let me know, it's okay. This is publicly available information that I give out all the time, but I do appreciate you. Okay, so the squads are basically complete, models in the mail withstanding. The rest need to be brushed off and cleaned up and get ready for paint. I've had this desire for a while to kind of restart my old Eldar army, and in order to do that, I wanted to get them all off the old bases and put them onto something a little nicer. I want to showcase the army that I started with in the hobby, and I can't think of a better way to do that than cleaning them all up and getting them to look their best. At the same time, I don't want to strip almost any of these models. I want to keep everything the way it was when I originally painted it, so a base swap makes a lot of sense. Having the army is an awesome reminder of where I started in the hobby, and by giving them all new bases, I can unify the army regardless of how they look and keep them going for even longer. To begin that process, I want to get some sweet base toppers to print out on my 3D printer. The goal will be to rebase everything onto the appropriate sizes for today's use and fill out the army with the units I couldn't get when I was a kid. This was mostly spurred on by a recent deal I got on Marketplace, where I found an old army case that had a partially painted squad of Harlequins in it. And that's a project that I want to get to and do some justice to, probably sooner rather than later too, and get them into this army. If you haven't seen that video, I highly recommend checking it out up here. As far as the bases go, I found a few sets from Zabavka Workshop on my mini factory, and I think they will work perfectly for Eldar. These hex bases have that alien vibe that I want, and I think using a Necromunda style blue on them will create some really nice contrast to this multicolored army. So I downloaded them and got to printing. Once they're all printed up and cured, I'm going to start painting them. Then we can prep the clean models by pinning them and eventually drilling through the bases to make them really sturdy and permanent. For color, I want to go pretty bright. Like I said, I want to unify this army with something that will stand out really well on the table and have some variety that can be added in depending on the unit. I'll start with a coat of bright blue that will contrast with pretty much all the other colors in the army. Then fill in the metallics with pretty much the first silver I grab off my shelf. It doesn't really matter. Most of it will get covered up with rust, so I'm not too worried about that color for now. Speaking of which, I use some watered down orange brown over the top of the metallic bits and let that spill into some of the cracks on the bases. Before we continue, I want to let you know that I will be teaching some mini painting classes at Soonercon on June 21st through the 23rd down in Norman, Oklahoma. Links will be in the description if you want to check it out, and I really hope to see you there. Next up, I'm going to lay down a thin layer of dark blue speed paint to get into those recesses. This will be followed up by a dry brush of the same base blue with a little bit of white mixed in. Quick and easy, and they're almost done. Just some weathering to bring in a little more color. I want it to feel like these machine parts are kind of corrupting this nice blue alien planet and just breaking down almost immediately when they hit the ground. It makes for an interesting story, as well as keeps the bases really high contrast. You won't miss this army on the table for sure. I also decided to use a little dirty down rust to give the color more variety, and then come back in with a light overcoat of that silver to bring back some shine. Finally, a little bit of orange pigment powder to tie it all together and help matte everything down. Overall, I'm very excited to use these, and the pack I got from Zabavka has all of the sizes that I will need to fill out the entire army. After these fire dragons get painted, it will be a matter of counting up the types of units I currently own, making sure they're going to go on the appropriate base sizes, printing them out, and rebasing them all together. Okay, so the bases are done and we can get back to the fire dragons. Before priming the minis, I want to pin them to cork. That way I can hold them and cover them completely without having to worry about masking off the bases or something. When they're done, I can drill a small hole through the base and get these models pinned down permanently. I started with 2 light coats of primer to really make sure that these were covered and protected. Once they're dry, it's time to start getting some color. I'll start with a 4-color combo across all of the models, one after the other. We'll start with dark red, go red, orange, and yellow. The idea is that with the airbrush, I can get a deep red over the black primer to start with and fill out the shadows. Then come in with the main red to cover up most of that, but only leaving the deepest recesses that darker red. From the top, I'll use the orange, mainly focusing this like a zenithal highlight, so I know where to hit the armor with highlights later on using a regular paintbrush. I do want this to be more opaque towards the top so we can transition from the lower part of the model as well. And finally, I'll finish that off with some yellow that will mainly cover the top third of the model, focusing on getting the helmet really nice and bright. Together, these colors help sell the fire part of these models, and we can use the contrasting colors from the base to tie everything together later on. I get my wet palette out and get prepped, and the rest from here will just be brushwork. If you don't have an airbrush, then a good dry brush will make short work of these colors, and you can get pretty much the same result. So don't worry about the airbrush. Use whatever you have on hand. Although, the airbrush is pretty great, and you should probably get one sometime. Just saying. With the brush, I'm going to come in with black and take care of the hoses, gems, and cloth. Almost like hitting the reset with these parts so we can see what's going on the model. Breaking up the color with a quick base coat really helps. Using yellow, I want to do a couple of things. Edge highlight any of the top facing edges, as well as water it down and glaze that yellow towards the top of each volume. This just helps define the shapes and keeps things focused on the fiery parts of the fire dragons. I'll also bring in some orange brown and glaze that into the fins on the helmet and make those shapes stand apart. And finally finish that off with an edge highlight around the main faceplate. This just helps separate those pieces so we can actually see them even though they're pretty much the same color. It's not necessary for a tabletop paint job, but it does look pretty good. For the main part of the gun, I decided to bring back the gold that I used across all my old models. The tank, main body, and tip of the gun will all be gold, and I'll use silver to bring out the glyph on the tank portion, kind of just a callback to those older models. The barrel will remain black for now, and I can come back later with some gray and define it a little better. I decided to go really hard on the color and make all of the cloth blue. It's just going to be really bright. It stands out and ties directly to the bases of the models. and I honestly really like how this looks. So a dark blue as a base coat, lighter blue to pick out those raised details, and finally some white mixed into that light blue as a final highlight on the most prominent details and edges. And once all that gets done, I get to drill holes in the base and pin them down. I'm very happy with how these turned out. They're bright and fun, and they look really good on the table. These models stand out in a great way, and while the resin versions might be a little bit cleaner in their design, these still hold up extremely well and have been around for a very long time. The experience of picking up a project from my very first army has been really neat in a lot of ways too. Getting to look at all of the older models again, remembering weird decisions that I made, or better yet, wondering why I made those decisions at that time. Some of them are really weird. With the experience I have now, knowing how to paint better than I did back then has made it possible to finally go back and create what I probably would have wanted, or what I assume I would have wanted in the first place. If you have an army or project that you're struggling with, maybe you can't get the right color combinations or look that you're after, just remember that you can always put it down and come back to it whenever you're ready. And if you need models on the table for a game and still want to push forward, that's totally fine too. I still like the models that I painted for those reasons, and it was for a good reason. The memories made around models like these aren't how they were painted, but the games that they were played in, and it's just far more important. Thank you again for joining me on another miniature rescue. If you liked something about this video, please consider hitting that like button, sharing this video with your hobby friends, and subscribing for more miniature rescues. Once again, I'm Casey, and I will see you in the next video. And of course, here are my completed Eldar Fire Dragons. Thanks again.